Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is the 11th edition of the Burning Issues. We do this every month where The Square resident panelists discuss issues that you, our viewers, have put this for us. We do this on a monthly basis, so this is to say this is 1 year of doing Burning Issues. This is our 11th edition. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on Kwibohora26. We're going to look at Rwanda, 26 years of liberation from the genocide against the Tutsi. And we're going to look in particular at leadership and accountability. We're going to understand if our youth are ready to take on the mantle in terms of leadership from our predecessors and accountability in general. Another key issue we're going to talk about is gender-based violence. We're also going to look, in that regard, we're going to focus on the recently launched, soon-to-be implemented National Sex Offenders Registry, if this is something that can curb the steady rise of cases in teenage pregnancies, in cases of defilement and rape. My name is Dan PC, host of The Square, and as always, I am joined by The Square residents panelists, and I'll start with you, Charlie. Great to have you on Burning Issues Edition 11.
Samia, Diana, how are you?
Good.
I love your hair.
Thank you. Thank you. I was hoping you'd be polite and make that comment. Berna, great to have you on the show,
Thank
as
you,
always. Yes.
We love your hair too.
Thank you. Any midweek highlights? As you know, on The Square, before we get into the thick of things, we like just touching on small highlights of the week that have caught the attention of our resident panelists. Berna, I'll start with you. Is there anything you'd like to share before we start tonight's show?
I was hoping that I wouldn't say it, but I have to. One, there's this story that's been going around about a man with 7 wives. Is it 7?
7.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's so painful to see how the media covers it in a very casual way. Like, the women are happy, this man is taking care of them, and it's all good, you know. For such an issue, the simplicity with which the media is covering it, I think, is quite absurd. One, because we tend to forget the cost of polygamy on our society, the long-term consequences, you know. I mean, think about it this way. On average, if there are seven women, how many children will come out of that family? Does the man have the capacity to take care of them? Probably not. So you'll find that still the state will come in, you know, whether it has to finance their education, health.
And there's a reason it's not legal.
You know? Yeah,
in
so
Rwanda. Yes.
the social pressures. So when you see the media covering it in a very casual manner, you know, because they even went at length to take pictures of the house and show his car, just to kind of say, look, this man is fine, which is quite absurd and
so
painful.
for your issue is, one, it's not legal. Two, the casualness with which the media reported it, it leaves a lot to desire, especially because you're talking about the social cost, the long-term social cost.
Yes.
In a country, as you know, we're not the richest country on earth, and being able to provide for such families is very difficult.
Yeah, and I just feel that the people who do media monitoring should expand the scope beyond politics, you know, because usually there's a lot of media monitoring on political stories or, you know, stories that, but I think they should do more and also start to look at the other content that is produced, whether it's social or, and the reason for that is because increasingly there are many content providers. So it's difficult for ordinary citizens to know who is telling the truth and who is not.
Yeah.
The other thing is, for instance, right now we have this whole wave of digital influencers who will come up with a creative post promoting a product, which is subtle. Now, the difference is mainstream media, if content is sponsored, you have to label it as sponsored. And that helps the audience to know that this is sponsored material. But now we have this wave where influencers...
It's ambiguous.
Yes, yeah. And so for any other ordinary person, they will think, oh, this is this is just nice, when in actual sense, this person has actually been paid to, yeah.
I think that's another topic for another day, especially the influencers and the promotion of various products and things, and the ambiguity vis-a-vis having it, straightforward, and the impact on consumers. Charles, any midweek highlights?
Yes, I think we did make a pledge to our audience ever since the COVID-19 pandemic broke down that we shall endeavor as much as possible to have a highlight around COVID. I am extremely concerned that the numbers are growing, and they have, I have heard reliably that they have attacked correctional services, correctional centers or holding centers or prisons or prison cells, depending on the dictionary that you're holding. Now, I think there's a very, very big issue to be concerned with here, because one, we need to be extremely careful, and by we I mean our judicial, police, RIB, and everyone who is around the arresting value chain. They need to be extremely careful on how they hold people. I am very bothered that if we have numbers spiking up because they are from prison cells, what about all these people who are put together in stadiums? What about all these people who are put together in police cells just because
they broke curfew?
They broke curfew regulations. I am not saying they should go unpunished, but we are potentially exposing ourselves to an explosion of numbers just because we're very quick to arrest and apprehend and put people in prison cells. Yeah,
that's true. That's a very valid point. So thanks, Charlie and Brenna, for your midweek highlights. And to our viewers, thanks for tuning in. The conversation right now that we'll kick off with is liberation, Kwibohora26, Rwanda's liberation. On 4th of July, we're going to commemorate the 26 years of Rwanda being liberated from the genocide against the Tutsi by the Rwanda Patriotic Front. Now, last week, we saw the RPF meeting that took place. Usually it's private. But it was open to certain, members of the public, especially the youth, and privileged. But aren't you usually invited?
No.
Anyway, it was held open. It was public to a certain degree, and during this time, leadership accountability came under scrutiny by mostly the President of the Republic, President Paul Kagame, and it was found seriously lacking. I'm not going to go into the details of what we've been reading and hearing from the meeting, but top leadership was found under scrutiny, was found lacking. And my question, just to kick off this conversation, based on also what our viewers have told us, Charles and Brenna, what do you think? What's your opinion on this? And how do you think, what necessary things that need to be implemented to actually build on leadership accountability to start off? And I want to just say that, we've talked on the square several times. We've had the Auditor General come on the show a couple of times, and in his reports, he's always talked about some of these things. So it seems that finally, what, Mr. Biraro always harps on about every year in, year out, for once we are seeing, the effects of, to start with the Auditor General's report. But generally speaking, how can we do better? How can our leaders do better in terms of accountability? And Charles, I'll start with you.
Yep. I think first of all,
and sorry, what solutions?
No, I'm not privileged.
Yeah. And also, Charles,
yes.
Not only what can be done to improve accountability, but solutions as well.
Yes. Okay. Just to be again solution oriented.
Yes.
And probably even here on the square, we must be amongst those who have been, who are guilty of nailing the Auditor General, because I think on the two occasions that he has appeared here, we personally have coined the phrase that barking dogs seldom bite, and I'm not in a position to retract that statement as yet, because I still think that a lot more can be done, but it goes on to just paint a real picture, the things, some of the allegations that our leaders have been faulted for are not new to us. And I want to approach this whole accountability thing in two ways. One, it is very Rwandan, it is very RPF leadership it is so much at the forefront of the country's leadership to really make people to hold people accountable for their actions, especially when they hold a public office. And I believe that if it has happened to one leader and another one, and the line is extremely long, whoever is in a position of leadership should not be taken by surprise. So that's one. The other thing, and I have a bit of a problem with, is the way it is done.
The way what is done?
It's the way the so-called accountability is done, holding people accountable. Because if the Auditor General releases a report, you would expect that the other sister organizations or watchdogs of the like should react to the Auditor General's report, and the media, as opposed to a reaction from a leadership retreat in Gako, or an RPF meeting at Rusororo, or a presidential press conference. Yes, because after all, you're going to have Umushichirano once in 2 years. NEC will probably sit once a year, or expanded NEC twice a year. The leadership retreat will happen once a year. What happens along the way? Why do we have to wait for that big event to say we are holding people accountable at the big event? Because that is how it comes out. Yet that's not the case. The Auditor General has sounded his drums throughout the whole year. We always read how the Ombudsman complains that the numbers of people who are declaring their wealth is reducing, and so on and so forth. So you ask yourself, what is happening along the way? And that is the area I have a contention with, and say, whether it's Public Accounts Committee, whether it is prosecution, or Rwanda Investigation Bureau for that matter, or the boards of these institutions, or the Prime Minister's office, there is somebody or a combination of all of them who is sleeping on their job, who is only waiting to pounce after the president has pronounced himself. And I can side to a very large extent with the president's frustration. You know, why does it have to wait for me to hold a microphone and say these things? So I believe those institutions can perform better than they're performing. Yes.
And in a nutshell, you know, in terms of looking at a potential solution, or just reiterating what I think everyone knows, is that there needs to be, you know, checks and balances, maybe on a monthly, quarterly basis. It should not happen at the end of the year on these big events that you're saying, whether it's Umi Herero, National Leadership Retreat, or, you know, press conferences like you're saying,
yes,
that escalate until it reaches our, you know, head of state. There should be monitoring and mechanisms to ensure that these issues don't happen. And I remember, yes, we talked about this during the show we had on mayor's resignations and so forth and so on. And I think Brenna is the one who raised that point, that when it comes to the evaluation period, Imihigo, why is it then that we find them lacking? You know, why does it take an entire year to find that these performance monitoring evaluation mechanisms are not working on an annual basis? It should be more than that. So yeah, I think that's what you're...
Yes. Precisely. That is it that these institutions are overwhelmed, or they are not extremely efficient at doing their job? They have too much work, or they are not as armed, or there are certain fish that cannot be caught by these institutions. Where is the missing link? And I think it's the solution. You did ask me that, Diana, where I find it. I think it lies purely in strengthening, monitoring, and arming these institutions. Yeah. Yes.
Further?
I feel that, first of all, everybody should be concerned, especially if you are an enforcement agency. If the head of state has to help you do your job, then clearly, you know, there are bigger issues. And I think it goes back to the whole public service structure, because when you look at the public service structure, you have public institutions that are quite efficient, and then you have those that struggle. And so if you really want to make an assessment, is to ask yourself, why does, for instance, RDB do very well, and why does another institution not do as well as RDB? And you'll find that even with public institutions, it matters who heads the institution. So in some of these organizations, the leadership is lacking. And by leadership, I mean the ownership of the responsibility. If you are a head of a ministry, your KPIs are very clear. And you would think that for any person in position of power, your job on a daily basis is to ensure that, you know, the team is working towards the KPIs, you know, for the institution. But that's not the case. As a result, you find that sometimes you have a very technical head of institution, and then the people below either are incompetent, or yet this person cannot sack the incompetent people. One of the other fundamental issues that are a problem in terms when it comes to accountability within the public system, for instance, is it is difficult to sack incompetent people. You know, there are many people who will be, who will tell you, in private of course, they are appointed to these jobs and they just can't get rid of incompetent people.
I know we had a guest from a big head of an institution on the square once, I won't mention who, but who told us, you know, in his institution, he inherited a legacy of incompetence. And unfortunately, there's nothing, because of bureaucratic, you know, loopholes, he could not replace this incompetence. So, you know,
considering he said it on air.
Yeah, well,
I think it's not a secret that it was the former Director General of RSSB.
Oh, yes. So these are issues, you know, that
so
competence and
it becomes difficult.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, they will come and ask, you were sent to do this job. I mean, it's probably 1 year down the road. What have you achieved? And everybody will be blaming this person for failing to do the job. But in actual sense, when you look at the team, this person has no right over the team. And not that you expect this, whoever is put in position to come with their own team, but you would expect that there's a way that competence can be encouraged within the public service. I think that is still lacking, because the reality is in some of these institutions, you find that also, and so you can't say anything because they are, you know, they are well connected, you know.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I also want to
it's absurd.
But Charles, before you weigh in, just to recap, to make sure, you know, you're saying that we need systematic and regular monitoring mechanisms for leaders and leadership, you know, to find these weaknesses or these weak links. Brenna, you're saying a lot of our leaders, you know, inherit a legacy of incompetence, and based on various bureaucratic, you know, this or that, or someone being a who's who, are unable to get rid of this incompetence and bring fresh blood that can drive forward these institutions. But I just wanted to quickly ask, do you think we also, when it comes to accountability, have an issue of our leaders not making these hard decisions? Because accountability doesn't mean sitting on the fence, you know, playing it safe. And I think, if I remember correctly, the president in one of the leadership retreats talked about this, that sometimes we have leaders who don't want to make the tough decision and bear the brunt of whatever consequences come. So we have leaders who'd rather just play it safe, but at the expense of institutions. So do you think this is also an issue still?
Of course, it is an
taking
issue.
These hard decisions.
It's part of the problem, because when you look at some of the institutions, you'll find that, for instance, there's a very junior PS who is quite technical, full of life. They don't have the
political,
you know, and they also the bureaucracy. You know, they're not familiar with the bureaucracy, and they want to do things, and they're just PS. And then on top, you have this senior cadre with, you know, with a lot of connections. How the hell do you expect this young person to influence decision making? And so what they will typically do is, when you call a meeting, they will just sit and take notes and leave. And after that, probably in the afternoon when they're watching Netflix, they'll tell their friends, oh God, it's, you know. So
yes.
It's a delicate balance, but I think there has to be a shift, because it's 26 years down the road. there has to be a way of one enforcing integrity within the public service, code of ethics. I don't know whether that would require setting up a different institution that enforces that. Because you want to get rid of, currently, part of the other problem is that, for instance, with the Mihigo, people worry that if they score others based on the reality, this person will go and report somewhere and say, oh, this so-and-so doesn't like me. This is why I got, I didn't get a fair rating. So there has to be someone else who can actually take an independent assessment, for instance, of Imihigo and say, look, we think based on our own independent investigation into this issue, we think that you're actually not doing your job. Then that kind of empowers you, if you're the supervisor, to, even for the team, to understand that the appraisal process is based on delivery, nothing else. It doesn't matter who you know or who you're connected to. Once you take up the job, this is what your performance, this is how your performance is measured. And it's very clear. Otherwise, it's difficult. People are afraid of, it's eggshells.
Yeah. Charles, you wanted to say something
Yes,
earlier?
I wanted to say something, and it's directly related to being afraid.
Being
Now,
afraid of what exactly? The hard decisions?
that's what I mean. Yes,
Okay.
the hard decision.
Okay.
You see, Rwandan leadership cracks a very hard whip when it comes to accountability. So it is very easy for a director general to make of an institution or a leader, whether it's a PS or whatever, a leader of an institution, to make a very well-intended decision of, for argument's sake, speedily investing in a software that will save the institution of a lot of analog way of doing things. Now, in his mind, or with all the people he works with, is like, time is of the essence here. I need to do this in a speedy manner. By the time I go through the entire procurement chain and 90 days, call for interest and so on and so forth, we're going to miss out on an opportunity. Now, the intention is good. The end result is good. But the means through which he has done it is found out to be faulty. Now, unfortunately, it is difficult for people to come back and say, did he actually intend to use faulty or inappropriate means to acquire this software? Now, you will be blamed irrespective of the end result of what you did. I will give you another example. When, and this is directly, this now goes to the legal side of things, is that before a court of law, the judge, one of the things one of the things the judge has to prove is that if you are presented as having caused financial loss to your institution, one of the things that the judge has to be convinced of is that you had intent. Now, criminal intent is one of the most difficult things to prove. And sometimes people ask themselves that, why is it that leaders are brought to book? They are humiliated through the whole process, spend weeks sleeping on cold floors, and then
They're not guilty.
they are found not guilty.
So you're saying there's
Yes.
a fear. There's a fear of what exactly?
So
Charles?
what happens, because of people are afraid of that humiliation, people are afraid of being judged on the merit of having made the right decisions. They therefore say, I will not do it. The direct impact of that is inefficiencies in the system. Such people are hardly, at most they'll just appoint somebody else into that position because you did not do what you're supposed to have done on time or within a certain framework. So if accountability can also stretch to there's a Kinyarwanda phrase these Bayobos have of Nacho yachishije, nta nicho yishe. You know,
Yes,
you neither did something extremely bad, neither did you do
you.
something extremely good.
Yes.
You're just okay.
But therein,
Yes.
therein surely lies the problem. You cannot expect results. You cannot move forward if you're just stagnated in thinking that you don't make a tough decision.
Yes.
Accountability means that you are willing, based on your belief and your willingness to explain and be accountable to your decision. That's it. But if that saying in Kinyarwanda said, you're not here, not there.
Yes.
I think that's,
Yeah. So that fear of theirs.
How are we going to let go?
I don't envy our public servants.
Yes.
It's not an easy job, and we're not here just throwing stones and so forth and so on. It's not an easy job.
That's public servants.
No, but I have a solution to this.
Yes.
I suggest. You see, sometimes until you're pained, and you'll never know how walking on a hot stone actually burns your feet until you get there and you burn your feet. All this array of civil servants who have been embarrassed and been taken through the proceedings and ended up being found not guilty. We need to find one or two to wake up in the morning and sue government for illegal detention, for wrongful dismissal.
You can actually sue. It's possible.
Yes, of course it is possible, but we need it to be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
and yes, and that probably will wake up somebody and say, before we rush to dismiss and arrest and embarrass, let us first do a thorough investigation.
I like that solution.
Yes.
I like that solution, Charles. You
different-
disagree?
No.
Or you just have an alternative?
I have a different view on where someone just stays in a position waiting to be sacked or moved. I think people should be allowed, and I don't know why it's, I'm told it's difficult, like you can't resign. I don't know why it's difficult for someone to say, look, under these conditions, it's impossible for me to do this job and buy. Instead of spending 2 or 5 years of inaction, waiting to be sacked, honestly, I think we need to get to a point.
The mayors showed us it's very easy to resign.
No.
They showed us it's very easy
even
to leave public for personal reasons, not even giving. They showed us it's easy to do that.
That's even more condescending. You know how you wake up and tell the citizenry, like, look, due to personal reason,
I'm leaving.
I'm
not serving you anymore.
Yeah, but you want that it's genuine. If people feel that they can possibly contribute somewhere else, let them go. It shouldn't be a problem. But when you talk to some of them, they tend to feel that it's unheard of to say, look, probably you thought I had this capacity, thank you for the honor, but I can't do it. I think then
so
that
we have a
time.
mentality in public service that people will sit in a position waiting to be moved or get sacked because there's a culture, unspoken culture of fear of just resigning,
throwing in the towel.
of throwing in the towel.
Yeah,
and what do you think? How can that be combated?
And I think Charles's party has to do more of that. To encourage.
That's not your party too.
You're even wearing our colors.
Yeah.
It should encourage cadres.
Yes.
If they feel they are given positions and they are unable, they should just tell the party that, look, be honest about it. Otherwise, it compounds the problem, the image of the party. Because if you keep entrusting cadres with huge responsibilities and 2 or 3 months down the road or a couple of years down the road, they can't deliver. It's a problem for the party.
I agree. Now, because we also have to talk about another topic that's really been causing social, uproar across the country. Still on accountability, last question. How ready do you think our youth are to take on the baton, to carry forward the mantle of leadership from our current leaders, from their predecessors? And, you're talking about cadres and young cadres and so forth and so on, pushing forward the ideals of the main party, RPF, but also the ideals of this country, leadership ideals. How prepared our youth to take this forward? Brenna?
It's a difficult one.
Yeah, it's difficult.
It's a difficult one.
I mean, your youth as well. How prepared are you to carry forward?
Almost crossing.
You're still in the bracket of youth. Yes.
It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one because, on one hand, there are these opportunities, and I always feel that we are very lucky because Rwanda is quite a young country, and young people are encouraged to step up. But if you look at the generation before us, the amount of hard work and sacrifice that they put in, especially in doing things, and we're a selfish generation. We're a generation with a sense of entitlement. You've gone to school. You have basically almost the basics. Okay, so already that gives you a sense of entitlement. You want to cherry pick. What you can do, what you can do, what you can't do, unlike the generation before us, which had first of all, the circumstances were quite different. They didn't have as much luxury as we have today.
As Charles says, the mayonnaise children.
Did I say that?
You said that in the previous show. We are the mayonnaise generation, so to speak.
So the rules of the game are quite different. So,
but that's it.
Going to your question, I feel that we are not there yet. You can't just hand over and say, look, it's young people. You will still need the mentorship, to bring you back to the reality. Otherwise, as a mayonnaise generation, you make decisions based on what's the return and not look at the long, yes. And yet you always need that perspective in terms of decision making to say, look, where is this country coming from? Why do we have this kind of politics in the first place? What do I need to do to, looking ahead 10 years from today or 20 years from today, what kind of a country do we deserve and what can we do about it? So
absolutely.
There's I don't have an answer, but I feel that it is work in progress. And the beginning point is the level of consciousness, the youth to appreciate that they have a stake, in whatever is happening, get interested and do everything they can within their space. Because sometimes we tend to think you must be in government or you must be a public official to contribute. No, it's still within your space, whatever you can do, because all that adds up into, the future that we want to see.
I like your point on having a long-term vision and thinking of the sacrifice. Not what can my country do for me, but what I can do for my country. Charles?
I think some youth, it's a very generic statement to say are the youth ready or are the youth are not ready. I think that would be very, it'd be quite generic of us to say that. Because we have had people tried and tested and some have succeeded, therefore it is a case, a very good case to say, yes, we do have people who are capable of doing this. Because we have had cases of people who have tried, and you find somebody is a minister for 8 months and he's under 35 years old, and maybe there are other problems apart from age that made him not become extremely successful, and it would be a wrong assumption to say, no, they are not ready. I think we did have this discussion,
yes,
when Mzee Tito Rutaremara was here.
Let me rephrase the question. How can we ensure that they deliver?
That's where I was actually going with this. Yeah. I think they need to be supported. The youth definitely have the skills, they have the ability, they may not have the experience, and that's where they need to be supported by those who have been around for some time. And I'll give a classic example. If you have a director general in an institution like RBA who is in his 30s, you need to have a board that person in his 30s would listen to, that is an older generation. So guidance, mentorship that Bana was talking about, but that is very, very deliberate to that institution. I like to give a perfect example the army and the police. You know, you'll wake up in the army and almost know that you can be a platoon commander, you can be a company commander, you can be a battalion commander, you can be a brigade commander, all the way up to the chief of defense, without people pinpointing and wondering who can do that, because you have gone through certain very specific training for that job. You have served in similar institutions or in similar circumstances for a certain time, and you can do that job. You're fitting into an institution. You're fitting into a way of doing things. So it is not very difficult for that individual to be there. So it is not an individualized position. And
it's part of a system.
Yes.
And that's how the military works.
Yes. And therefore, and that's why you realize some of our institutions, you find a ministry is called Kwabnamata. You find an institution is called Kwamshisi. It's because the institution is associated with the individual. No. We need to grow our institutions in such a way that anyone can walk in and run the institution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the youth, you know, taking forward this leadership position, I would like to reiterate, and I think we mentioned this when we had Zeti Torutaremara and Mire, the leadership coach. We should have a way of allowing some of these youth to make mistakes. Yes. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Absolutely. We have amazing, brilliant youth, fast-tracked up the ladder of leadership, you know, and mistake here or there because maybe lack of, you know, mentorship or lack of a sounding board, like you're saying. You know, a mistake and the repercussions are so dire. And, you know, whereas this is part of being young and making mistakes and so forth. So I don't know how exactly that can be, you know, strategically done, but I think there must be room for mistakes and mistakes to learn from.
I actually think they do, actually. If anyone has observed, usually people are given...
I feel some slight mistakes have had the punishment or whatever for the mistake really doesn't match the mistake. It's like huge. It's just brutal. In my opinion, observing some of these things. And sometimes I feel sorry for this young person because I'm thinking, this was genuine and honest. It's hard. So I don't know.
Sometimes, of course, we don't know. We don't have all the details. Yeah. So you only see, you know, from the outside. But quite often, and I think increasingly, people are given several opportunities and they are spoken to informally. And yeah, then
before there's a last from grace.
The other last point I wanted to raise actually is around incentives and motivation for people in public service. Right now, if you look at the structure within public service, it could benefit from more incentives, you know, for people who work in public service. For instance, if you're going to put up housing, don't put up the kind of Vision City housing for public service. You know, come up with an estate that is affordable, that reflects actually how much, you know, people earn within public service, you know. So incentives like that, schools provide support. With that, then you kind of reduce the financial pressures that force people into, you know, some of these illegal dealings, because most of the time people are trying to earn extra money to, you know, help them maintain the lifestyle. So it would be good if whoever is in charge to kind of look at a scheme like we have for teachers and make the public service
incentivize.
Yes,
public
yes, and even performance. I was actually thinking we probably need awards for public service. As a way of motivation. I mean, look at this year. You only have, if you look at the coordinating committee, what is it called? The Joint Task Force. Yeah. You look at that
for
team.
The pandemic.
Yes. And what they've been able to deliver. I'm not sure that they will be getting any financial return for the extra hours and commitment. So how would you reward such a team so that next time we have a problem, everybody takes up the responsibility, because naturally human beings respond to incentives.
And reward. Very quickly, if we can now move to dealing with gender-based violence. We've talked about, gender-based violence, about gender on the square numerous times over the last 3 years. And recently, the National Prosecution the Rwanda Public Prosecution Authority and PPA is announced that they were going to start implementing what is known as the National Sex Offenders Registry. So this is a registry that's open to the public that shows people who have been tried and people who have been found guilty of sex offense towards minors and also towards adults in general. So very quickly, I want to ask your opinion on this sex offenders registry, but the main question also, other than your expectations on this instrument in dealing with these cases of defilement and teenage statutory rape, actually, that's what we should call it, not teenage pregnancies, but pregnancies resulting in statutory rape and defilement. What are your expectations on the registry? 1, 2, this culture of silence that we have in Rwanda that facilitates these crimes to continue. In fact, members of parliament, specifically women on social media last week, but one, I think you know this, were really called out by Rwandans for not doing more than they should with this huge representation of women in parliament. So Berna and Charles, what's your take on this? Charles, do you want to start?
I'm very passionate about this issue.
Yes, exactly.
And I was excited to see that I think Rwanda is coming after South Africa to come up with this registry. But we must not lose sight of the fact that it is difficult to report sexual harassment, gender-based violence. It is extremely difficult. So if you ask me, I wouldn't be so excited about the registry. But
it's a step in the right direction.
Yes,
but
yes. We have to do as much as we can to prevent it in the first place from happening. I'll give you an example. You can see now the schools have been closed for quite some time. What we are seeing is that there are children who feel safe in schools. Now, these young girls have been at home for all this time. And these are young girls in homes where they share rooms, there's not enough space. You find one family sharing 2 rooms. And it's extremely difficult to see how these girls, young children will remain safe. So you want to focus on protecting these young girls, first of all, within their homes. We know for a fact that most of the time, these girls are abused by someone they know. They are abused by someone close to them. How do we get the local institutions, the local administrations, to really take this issue seriously? Because we are already seeing that some families will connive with the local administration not to report these cases. And it's extremely difficult for these children to even talk about it until the pregnancy is visible. They drop out of school. So
what radical and deliberate interventions do you think our leaders need to make? Because this is it's insanity doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. There's nothing that is going to change if we continue addressing this issue in the same manner that we have. So my question to you in terms of giving some solutions, radical as they may be, but what deliberate interventions do we need at this point? Very quickly before I go to Charles.
I don't know if it's this year or last year, when the head of state said that he's going to raise the cost of, destabilize anybody who can plan around insecurity. The cost is going to be raised. I think that has to be said about
sex offenders.
Yes. Everybody needs to make it their responsibility. In the Mihigos and everything, just make sure that protection of the girl child is there. And we are measuring this. Because it's one thing. If you look at the statistics, they keep going up and they will tell you, it's because we can report, we are tracking, but it just shouldn't be happening. So I don't know what the solution is, but it shouldn't be happening. And it's a function of so many things. we find that most of the time the victims are from vulnerable homes. Okay, so what you have to do again is address the poverty within the home. The local leadership again has a bigger hand in my view.
Absolutely. Charles?
Obviously, when you talk about gender and gender-related issues, quite often, I don't say it's the case all the time. We had someone from Plan Rwanda the other day who was a very, very passionate feminist. Quite often, it's women who will dominate that talk. So it's a disclaimer before I say whatever I'm going to say. But Diana, you did say something around radical approaches to some of these things. And to me, I look at two things. One, can we be very rough with people who are found guilty, for example, of defilement or rape? And can it be something that is really like out in the open and like, you know, name and shame? If somebody has gone home at 9:15 p.m. and you make them look like the worst person in the world.
You're talking about curfew.
Yes, curfew.
Okay.
Yes.
Why can't we do the same?
Why can't we name and shame?
Thank you.
The sex offenders? You know, you look at it. One has just become has been happy beyond reasonable times. Another one has messed up the lifetime of a young girl. Yeah. So why don't we name and shame? So you have embarrassed that person. Why don't you also embarrass another person so that it becomes a lesson to so I think that's one of the radical ways. Yes. But the other thing that
but very quickly on that point, I think I saw it on social media. Someone said the deliberate way in terms of how the Jerayo Mahoro campaign, the Gumamurugo campaign has been implemented by our leaders and getting the engagement of our communities. Why is there deafening silence when it comes to campaign to protect our girls?
It's institutions. Institutions would have to get the police to do all the
So I'm just
campaigns.
echoing what Charles says.
Yeah.
Let's give the same energy, the same focus and deliberateness to some of these issues.
Maybe the police should do training in all these institutions.
I know
how to run campaigns.
I know the police is doing a campaign for GBV. They announced it earlier on this year, but I'm yet to see it compared to the get home safe and stay at home.
Yeah, so that's one radical on being very deliberate about it. But then also the other thing is let's not take things for granted. A friend of mine told me that a colleague, not even a subordinate, they were about at the same level in the company, took offense in him saying she was smart. Now, I don't know whether the girl was a typical definition of an African villager, or the guy said he was smart and alluded to other things. I was not there in that particular setting, but we should not take things for granted. Men, and I think we did have this topic around when we hosted Auntie Mary Barikunjeri here on the show. Do not take advantage. Women should not take it for granted that men understand women issues.
But let them be open to learning.
Yes. No, absolutely, yes.
But Charles, let them be open to learning. If we point out this is an issue, please don't go on the defensive.
Yes.
Understand how you can learn and better the situation. And make sure you don't repeat.
Yes, you will be very surprised that there are women out there who do not have a problem at all with a man smacking their part of their body. No, you'll be surprised.
No.
Yes.
I mean, just because someone doesn't have a problem.
Yes, it might be a small percentage, but it might make the man feel that it's okay to do it.
Okay, so let that man, and that woman who allows it to happen, when the time comes and it's pointed out that is categorically wrong and unprofessional, unless it's, you're both in your bedroom, you can do that. But it's not conducive in the workplace. Let that man refrain from doing it and know the repercussions of doing it.
But then,
it shouldn't be happening.
I don't want my point to go unnoticed. My point is, let us not take for granted that the way we all know we must be home at 9 p.m. and so on and so forth. Let us not take for granted that all men know the do's and the don'ts. when it comes to women issues. You
So-
see,
so
look at the facial expression that Bana has. She makes it look as if it's so obvious that every man knows it is wrong to stare at a woman's breasts. No, that's not the case.
Yeah, but
don't take it for granted.
But it is
there should
not.
be a deliberate program to tell men that these are the do's and don'ts.
Yeah, but you know what?
Yes.
I think we
I
are,
want
we
to
are, we are
respond to
coddling
that.
men
Yes.
like the little babies
know,
and creatures. There's
I
some
know.
basic common sense, and you're just in a system that has condoned it so much that it
Please.
seems natural. But to fair points to what you're saying, for men who might be ignorant and so forth and so on, I don't believe it. But for the sake of argument, let them allow to stand to be corrected.
Yes.
When it's pointed out that what they're doing
Yes.
is offensive and is
And the
wrong.
guilty ones should be punished heavily.
Brenna, very quickly before we end.
First of all, I don't think it's ignorance.
Yeah.
I think it's just a deliberate culture. You know, I mean, how come women know all these things? Is it because, you know, we simply need to understand and take the responsibility, for instance, that we have with our sisters, our mothers, and look at every woman in the same manner. You know, you don't easily throw these, you know, your hands everywhere around your sister.
So why would you do
Yeah.
it?
Or around your child.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing that with your child or sister, don't do it with anybody else.
I think it's ingrained patriarchy.
Yeah, and
that-
even within the workplace. I mean, you want to you know, send a compliment to someone you have a relationship with, you know, a friendly. You don't meet me for the first time and you're all getting, you know, flowery around me. No, it's unprofessional.
So going back to,
But-
I feel like
yes.
we've lost the train of thought. We definitely need a conversation offline and also maybe online on this. But just very quickly regarding the radical interventions that are needed to curb the rise of teenage pregnancies, to curb that are steadily rising, the spike in defilement cases, you know, of girls and so forth and so on. You know, just gender-based violence in general. We are a country where we have 64% representation in parliament, for crying out loud. And we keep on doing the same thing, expecting different results. Abstinence, you don't provide condoms, you don't provide birth control. I mean, so, and Brenna, Charles, you said the cost of these offenses should be extremely high.
Yes, yes.
We should name and shame, so to speak, and apply the same elements of various campaigns across the country to campaigns to defy gender-based violence. Brenna,
But I also want to add something else along that, the training and the mental preparedness and the teachings that should be done to the girls. And take a perfect example of what Bana just said.
but also to the boys,
Yes,
please,
yes. No,
to
that
young boys as well.
every girl, woman, wherever she is, the moment she keeps to herself an offense that has made her uncomfortable or an inappropriate stare, look, touch, and whatever. The moment she keeps it to herself, she is not helping
So we should
the fight
encourage-
in any
we should
way.
encourage,
Yes, exactly.
victims to speak out.
I mean, look at it this way. When we're fighting a very big problem of poor customer care, RDB and everyone who mattered was telling us if you get poor service, leave without paying. Name and shame those places. You know, and this is not, this is just customer care. It's the image of the country. But now this is your life.
I think
Yes,
it's
yes.
easier said than done, but
Thank
definitely
you.
silence.
This is what I was thinking.
Silence actually is violence in this case.
It's
but,
easier said than done.
yeah.
And you must always remember that for a victim, anytime you report, the first response, even casually, is always, what were you wearing?
Exactly.
What were you doing there? You know, no one will say, oh, sorry. No, that is not always.
I think the
No,
victim,
but I think you've skipped one
the
level. I think
button cannot-
Charles and
first
Brenna-
start with that person. Start with the person who has done it to you. Start with the person who has smacked you. Start with the person who has stared at you. Start with the person who has sent you that text. Start with that person before you think about reporting.
Yeah.
Because that person is there in your face
We've come to
anyway.
the end of the show. I just want you to give you concluding remarks. Obviously, we never have enough time. That's why we stuck to two topics today for burning issues. Brenna, very brief closing remarks, accountability and defying gender-based violence.
Yeah, I feel that
Briefly.
one, motivate the public servants, allow flexibility for people to leave when they feel they can't do the job, enforce integrity and ethics in the workplace. GBV, it just starts with everybody understanding that it affects us. This girl who drops out of school is a problem for the country. You know, one way or another, you will be forced to deal with the problem. So we need to look at it not just as, you know, the victims dealing with the consequences, but as a society, we have the duty, we have the responsibility to do everything we can within our space to protect the girl child.
Charles, brief closing remarks?
Times have changed.
Yeah.
30 years ago, there was nothing to steal. Today, there is something to steal.
In public service?
In public service. I am not pro-thieves, but all I am saying, we should look at today's times with today's lenses.
No, that's true. Absolutely.
And closing remarks very quickly on gender-based violence?
No, I think we need to crack a hard whip to guilty offenders.
Yeah. Well, thank you as always. We'll be celebrating 1 year of doing Burning Editions next month, the 12th month. It's been a pleasure always doing this with you. Charles Brenner, thank you. To our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. Please keep the conversation going. We didn't have time to read your tweets, but we can see them. Please keep the conversation going on social media. We'd love to hear from you and learn from you and understand your insights and suggestions. And to our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you as always for partnering with The Square. To our viewers, have a good night. See you again next week, and thank you for tuning in.